Okay, we now move on to the last topic, international macroeconomic policy under the gold standard. Okay, this is an overview of international monetary systems. The international monetary systems have three standards or systems. First one is gold standard, and second one is Bretton Woods system. Third one is floating exchange rate. In today's lecture, we will focus on gold standard. The gold standard is a system in which gold is used as standard of value for currency. The currency value backed by gold. Currency and gold can be exchanged. So this is called convertible notes, dakanken in Japanese. よいしょ。So convertible notes means dakanken in Japanese. So under the gold standard, each central bank must fix the value of its currency relative to a quality of gold in ounces or grams by trading domestic assets in exchange for gold. Okay, so for example, 1 ounce equal to $35. So each central bank must target or fix the value of its currency relative to a quality of gold. So central banks foreign reserves, therefore gold. So therefore, central banks need sufficient gold reserve stock. So external balance in the gold standard country is that current account target plus to avoid the rapid change in reserve gold. Because a change in the amount of reserve gold changes gold price, central bank needs to avoid the rapid change in reserve gold. So surplus or deficit in the balance of payments had to be financed by gold shipments between central banks. So therefore, a state of BOP, balance of payments equilibrium, is desired. So in other words, the balance of payment equilibrium is the BOP balance. So balance of payments equals to 0. So therefore, central bank desired that balance of payments equals 0. So in other words, balance of payment equilibrium is the situation that is the current plus capital account balance is financed by private international lending without official reserves. Okay, now I introduce a mechanism that is called a price spacey flow mechanism. So in here, spacey means the gold. So the price spacey flow mechanism is recognized by the 18th century, and David Hume described. So this is the one of the most powerful and automatic mechanisms to enable all countries to achieve balance of payment equilibrium at the same time. So this is the illustration of the price spacey. Sorry about that. Okay, so this is the illustration of the price spacey flow mechanism. Okay, let's start here. If a country is balance of payment surplus, then gold inflows. So the economy, if the country is BOP surplus, then gold inflows. Then, which leads to an increasing in the money supply. Then, price level goes up. Note that price levels and monetary supplies move proportionally in the long run. So therefore, by reflecting the increasing in the money supply, price level also goes up. Then real appreciation occurs, so reducing domestic demand for foreign goods, then increasing imports and decreasing exports. And then which leads to balance of payments deficit. Okay, now balance of payments is balanced. The balance of payments surplus turns to be balance of payment deficit. So surplus changes to deficit, so the balance of payment is balanced. It's zero. Okay. In contrast, if a country is balance of payment deficit, then gold outflow occur. Then, as the result of outflow, gold outflow, then decrease in the money supply. Monetary supply decreases by reflecting gold outflow. Then, since price levels and money supplies move proportionally in the long run, price level also goes down. Then real depreciation occurs, increasing domestic demand for foreign goods, therefore increasing in exports and decreasing in imports occur. Then, which leads to balance of payment surplus here. Now, balance of payment deficit turns out to be balance of payment. So balance of payment deficit changes to surplus. Balance of payment surplus. Now balance of payment is balanced, is zero. So this is a price specie flow mechanism. So balance of payment surplus causes gold inflow and changes monetary supply, prices, export and imports, then balance of payment deficit occur. If a country is balance of payment deficit, then gold outflow occur, monetary supply changes, price goes down, and it changes exports and imports, then balance of payment surplus occur. So this is price specie flow mechanism. Now I introduce another concept, that is the gold standard rules of the game. So the rules of the game is the central banks means that central banks influence the financial asset flows so that the non-reserve part of the financial account matches the current account to reduce gold outflows or inflows. So this is the rule of the game. If a central bank suffers the running out of gold, then they want to get gold from abroad. In such situations, central bank sells domestic assets. Then by selling, so the when central bank sell domestic assets, then monetary supply decreases. Then domestic interest rate increases, and then capital inflow occur because interest rate in home country is relatively high than foreign countries. So therefore, capital inflow occur to the domestic country and gold inflow also occur. In contrast, if a central bank faces enough gold, then they want to get some profitable assets. In such a situation, central bank buys domestic assets. Then monetary supply increases. Then domestic interest rate decreases. Since the home interest rate is relatively low compared to the foreign interest rate, then capital outflow occurs. So gold outflows from home to foreign countries. So this is the rules of the game. When central bank faces the running out of gold, they sell domestic assets by increasing domestic. So the such domestic asset sale decreases money supply and increases domestic interest rate, causing capital inflow. If a central bank faces enough gold, then they buy domestic assets. Then monetary supply increases, domestic interest rate decreases, and capital outflow occurs. So this is the rules of the game. Sorry. So under the gold standard, let's consider the internal balance. So how about the internal balance under the gold standard? So the gold standard aims to limit monetary growth in the world economy to ensure the stability in the world price levels. So recall that if a monetary supply is growing, then the price also goes up. So the price also, so gold price also goes up. So therefore, central banks try to avoid such inflation, including gold price. So monetary growth causes inflation, including gold prices. But so therefore, the world economy, so therefore, overall price level becomes stable, relatively stable under the gold standard. But there is a problem. Inflation or deflation caused by a change in the relative prices of gold. So let's check the third lecture slide. So if the relative price of gold changes, inflation or deflation are caused. So therefore, sometimes inflation and its economy suffers inflation and deflation results in the relative price changes or relative price of gold changes. But overall, the world economy enjoyed the relatively stable world price under the gold standard. How about full employment? So the gold standard does not seem to endure full employment. For example, in the UK, unemployment pre-1914 was averaged to 60.6.2%. And for the 1947 to 1973, the average age of unemployment rate was 21%. So therefore, pre-World War One period, under the gold standard, the relatively high unemployment rate. So under the gold standard, so the country faces relatively high unemployment rate. So recall the monetary trilemma. So the gold standard gives up the monetary policies for domestic objectives. So therefore, central banks cannot do monetary policies for full employment. So monetary policies, so central banks can do monetary policies only for the foreign exchange intervention. So therefore, the unemployment rate was relatively high under the gold standard. Okay, now is the time to end this lesson. Okay, we covered so far what are macroeconomic policy goals. So there are two goals: internal balance and external balance. Extreme current account surpluses and deficits are problematic, but not extreme. Standard current account surpluses or deficits is not problematic, is not bad thing. Okay. What is the monetary trilemma? We covered monetary trilemma. Okay. Country needs to give up at least one item. The monetary policy for domestic goals, freedom of capital mobility, and fixed exchange rate. So what is a gold system? What is the role of central bank under the gold standard? Under the gold standard, central bank must fix the relative price of gold and its domestic currency. So what is a peace flow mechanism? Peace spacey flow mechanism. So we reviewed the illustration of the price spacey flow mechanism. Okay, rules of the game. Also, we covered the rules of the game. So when central bank faces the running out of gold, then they sells then sells the domestic assets, and if they face enough gold, then they buy some domestic assets. Okay, so in regard about internal balance, under the gold standard performs not well. So under the internal balance, under the gold standard, it's difficult for central bank to conduct monetary policy for domestic goals. So therefore, unemployment rate is relatively high. The price stability is succeed. So the many countries enjoy the relatively stable prices, but sometimes inflation and deflation occur due to the relative price of gold change. Okay, so this is the end of today's lecture. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. So see you next time. Bye.